Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Travel Stories. Tonight, we're going to wander together through one of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth during one of its most magical seasons. We're journeying to the Scottish Highlands in autumn, when the ancient mountains wear their finest colours, when the red deer stags call across the glens, and when the light takes on a quality so particular, so ethereal, that it seems to exist nowhere else in the world. I'm approaching this place as someone experiencing it for the very first time, with eyes wide and heart open, ready to absorb every detail of this legendary landscape. The Scottish Highlands have lived in my imagination for so long, built from photographs and films, from stories and songs, from the romantic poetry of a place that seems almost mythical in its beauty. And now, in the gentle decline of the year, as summer gives way to the contemplative quiet of autumn, I'm finally here. Let me take you with me on this journey. Let us walk these ancient paths together. Breathe this cool highland air and lose ourselves in the amber light of an October afternoon in one of Scotland's most timeless places. The journey north from Edinburgh reveals the changing character of Scotland's landscape gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. As the train moves away from the capital, the gentle farmland of the lowlands slowly gives way to something wilder, something older. The fields become smaller, bordered by stone walls that have stood for centuries. The hills begin to rise with more insistence. Trees cluster in valleys rather than standing in orderly rows. And soon, the landscape starts to hint at what lies ahead. Autumn arrives differently in the Highlands than it does in southern lands. Here, the season doesn't announce itself with a sudden dramatic flourish, but rather settles in gradually, like a slow exhalation after the brief intensity of summer. By late September, the first changes become visible. The bracken on the lower slopes begins its transformation from green to copper. The birch trees, scattered across the hillsides like delicate brushstrokes, start to show hints of gold among their leaves. The heather, which bloomed purple across the moorlands in late summer, now fades to a muted russet that blends with the grasses turning amber in the increasingly slanted light. The air itself changes. There's a crispness to it that wasn't there in summer, a clarity that makes distant mountains seem suddenly closer, more defined against the sky. Mornings bring a chill that requires an extra layer, and the dew lies heavy on the grass, sometimes not burning off until midday if the mist decides to linger. The light, already so different from what you find further south because of the latitude takes on an even more particular quality. It's a light that seems to glow from within the landscape itself, turning ordinary hillsides golden and making the surface of lochs shimmer like hammered bronze. October is perhaps the pinnacle of Highland autumn. This is when the colours reach their most intense, when the forests glow with their warmest hues, when the interplay between the evergreen pines and the deciduous trees creates the most striking contrasts. The days are growing noticeably shorter now. By mid-October, sunrise doesn't come until around 7:30, and the sun sets before 6 in the evening. But those hours of daylight are precious, filled with a quality of light that photographers travel from around the world to capture. The Highland landscape was shaped over hundreds of millions of years, carved by forces so powerful and persistent that they created one of Europe's most dramatic terrains. To understand the Highlands is to understand deep time, to grasp that these mountains, these glens, these lochs are the result of volcanic eruptions, tectonic collisions, and the patient work of ice. Around 420 million years ago, during the Devonian period, this land was alive with volcanic activity. Massive eruptions built mountains that would have dwarfed the peaks we see today. The rocks that form places like Glen Coe are the remains of ancient volcanic calderas, collapsed volcanoes whose drama now plays out in a different, quieter way through the theatre of weather and light. The granite that forms the cairngorms crystallized deep beneath the Earth's surface, only to be revealed millions of years later as the softer rocks around them eroded away. But it was ice that gave the Highlands their current form. During the last ice age, which ended only about 11,000 years ago, glaciers, thousands of feet thick, covered this entire region. As these rivers of ice moved inexorably downward and outward, they carved the landscape with patient violence. They created the deep, U-shaped valleys we call glens. They hollowed out the basins that would fill with water to become lochs. They scraped the mountainsides into the dramatic slopes and cliffs we see today, leaving behind hanging valleys where waterfalls now tumble hundreds of feet to the floor of the glen below. The Great Glen is perhaps the most dramatic example of this geological power. This enormous valley, running almost perfectly straight from southwest to northeast across the entire Highland region, marks a major geological fault line. It divides the Grampian Mountains to the southeast from the northwest Highlands. Loch Ness, that famous body of water, sits within the Great Glen occupying a valley so deep that its bottom lies below sea level. The same glacier that carved Loch Ness also created Loch Lochy and Loch Oich, a chain of deep freshwater lochs connected now by the Caledonian Canal. North of the Great Glen, the mountains are older still, some of the most ancient rocks in Europe. The Torridon sandstone, with its distinctive red color, was laid down over 1 billion years ago. The Louisian gneiss, found along the far northwestern coast, dates back nearly 3 billion years, almost to the very formation of the Earth's crust itself. These are rocks that predate not just Scotland, not just Britain, but the very configuration of the continents as we know them today. South of the Great Glen, the Grampian Mountains form the backbone of the Central Highlands. Here stands Ben Nevis at 1,345 meters, the highest peak in the British Isles. The Cairngorms, a vast plateau of high peaks and mountain tundra, create the largest area of high ground in Britain, much of it above 1,000 meters in elevation. These are mountains worn smooth by time and ice, their summits rounded rather than sharp, their slopes clothed in a mixture of heather moorland and remnant forest. The Caledonian forest, which once covered much of the highlands, is now reduced to fragments. But those fragments are precious. This is Scotland's only native pine forest, composed primarily of Scots pine, but also including birch, rowan, aspen, and juniper. It's a distinctive ecosystem, the only place in the British Isles with a true taiga biome, similar to the great northern forests of Scandinavia and Russia. In autumn, these forests become galleries of color. The pines remain dark green, providing a backdrop against which the birches display their gold, the rowans their orange-red berries, and the aspens their trembling yellow leaves. The Highland Boundary Fault, running from the Isle of Arran in the southwest to Stonehaven on the northeast coast, marks the division between the Highlands and the Lowlands. Though, as with many such boundaries, the reality is more complex than a simple line on a map. The geology changes certainly, but so does something more ineffable. North of this line, the land feels different. The scale changes. Human settlement becomes sparser. The mountains dominate. You enter a landscape where nature, even now, remains the primary presence, where human activity must accommodate itself to the demands of rock and water and weather, rather than the other way around. In autumn, as I first encounter this landscape, all these millions of years of geological history feel almost tangible. The mountains seem to hold their age within them. a patient permanence that makes the changing seasons feel like the quick pulse of a moment. The lochs, dark and deep, reflect not just the sky and surrounding hills, but also this sense of deep time, of processes that move on scales far beyond human comprehension. Inverness, the capital of the Highlands, sits at the northeastern end of the Great Glen, where the River Ness flows into the Moray Firth. It's a city of about 60,000 people, small by most standards, but perfectly sized to serve as both a modern Scottish city and the gateway to the wild lands to the west and north. Arriving here in early October, I find a place poised between two worlds: the contemporary bustle of a regional capital and the ancient pull of the Highlands that begin almost at the city's edge. The River Ness flows through the heart of Inverness, and in autumn, its banks are lined with trees showing every shade from green to gold to copper. The river itself, fed by Loch Ness, just a few miles to the southwest, runs clear and fast, its water the brown of peat tea, carrying the essence of the Highlands with it to the sea. Salmon, having spent years in the Atlantic, make their way up this river in autumn, driven by instinct to return to the streams where they were born. You can sometimes see them from the bridges that cross the Ness, dark shapes holding position in the current, gathering strength for the journey ahead. The city's Victorian buildings, constructed from the local sandstone, glow warmly in the autumn light. Inverness Castle, though it looks medieval, was actually built in the 1800s and now houses the Sheriff Court. It sits on a prominence above the river, offering views across the city and toward the mountains that rise to the south and west. From certain vantage points, you can see Ben Wyvis standing alone to the north, often wearing a cap of snow, even in early autumn. The weather in Inverness during October is characteristically changeable. The average daytime temperature hovers around 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, cool enough to require layers, but generally mild for this latitude. Mornings often start clear and cold, with temperatures dropping to around 4 or 5 degrees. By midday, if the sun emerges, it can feel almost warm, especially if you're sheltered from the wind. But the weather can shift with remarkable speed. A morning of brilliant sunshine can turn to rain by afternoon and back to sun again by evening. The Scots have a word for this grey, gloomy weather when it settles in for days: dreich. But they also have an old saying that there's no such thing as bad weather, only the wrong clothes. The preparation for exploring the Highlands requires some thought to layering. A waterproof jacket is essential, as is a warm fleece or sweater. Walking boots with good grip and ankle support are recommended if you plan any hiking, as paths can be muddy and slippery, especially after rain. The wind can be significant, particularly as you gain elevation, so a hat and gloves aren't out of place, even though it's still autumn rather than winter. From Inverness, the Highlands spread out in every direction like pages of a book waiting to be read. To the west lies Glen Affric, often called Scotland's most beautiful glen. To the south, Loch Ness stretches into the mountains. To the southwest, the road leads to Glencoe and Fort William. To the north and west, the wild lands of Wester Ross and Sutherland. Each direction offers its own character, its own particular beauty, its own stories written in stone and water. The city itself, while pleasant, serves primarily as a staging point. The real draw, the reason people come from around the world, lies beyond its boundaries in the wilderness that begins where the streets end. As I prepared to venture into that wilderness on an October morning, with my waterproof jacket packed and my camera ready, I feel a sense of anticipation that's almost electric. I'm about to enter a landscape that has captured imaginations for centuries, and I'm about to see it dressed in what many consider its finest seasonal garments. The drive from Inverness southwest toward Glencoe takes you along the Great Glen, following the route of the A82 that connects the Highland capital to Fort William and beyond. This is one of Scotland's most scenic drives, though perhaps no more scenic than many others in this part of the world. What makes it special is the way it reveals the character of the Highlands progressively, layer by layer, like a slow unveiling. The road follows the northern shore of Loch Ness for a time, offering glimpses of that famous water through the trees. The loch is enormous, nearly 23 miles long and over 700 feet deep in places. Its volume is greater than all the lakes and reservoirs in England and Wales combined. The sheer scale of it is impressive, a testament to the power of the glaciers that carve this valley. In autumn, the loch often wears a cap of mist in the morning, and the hills on the opposite shore appear as layered silhouettes in shades of blue and grey, like a traditional Japanese ink painting. Continuing southwest from Fort Augustus at the southern end of Loch Ness, the landscape begins to change character. The mountains grow higher, more rugged. The glens become deeper, more dramatic. Forest gives way increasingly to open moorland, where heather and grass covered the hillsides in a patchwork of autumn colors. Waterfalls, fed by the abundant highland rain, cascade down the mountainsides, some falling hundreds of feet in silver ribbons. And then, as you round a bend in the road, Glencoe opens before you. There are places in the world that carry a weight of drama that's almost palpable, where the landscape seems charged with an energy that goes beyond mere physical beauty. Glencoe is such a place. Even on first seeing it, even knowing nothing of its history or geology, you can feel it. This is a glen that speaks of violence, both geological and human, of forces that shaped not just rock, but story. The approach from the east brings you first to the Buachaile Etive Moor, the great herdsman of Etive, a mountain whose pyramid-shaped peak has become one of Scotland's most iconic images. It rises directly from the moor, its northern face a wall of rock and scree that draws climbers from around the world. At its base, the river Cúpal winds through the flat expanse of Rannoch Moor, and there, looking impossibly small against the massiveness of the mountain, sits the whitewashed Blackrock Cottage, one of the most photographed buildings in Scotland. In autumn, the scene takes on an almost painterly quality. The grasses and bracken on the lower slopes glow gold and copper in the light. The mountain itself, composed of volcanic rock, shows every shade from dark grey to rust red depending on how the light strikes it. Clouds, moving fast on the wind that almost always blows here, cast shadows that race across the mountainside, creating a constantly shifting pattern of light and dark. If you're lucky enough to catch it in the right light, with perhaps a touch of mist clinging to the upper slopes and the autumn colors at their peak, it's a scene that can stop your breath. The glen itself, as you enter it properly, is hemmed in on both sides by mountains. To the north, the Arnach Airgash Ridge presents one of Scotland's most challenging scrambles, a knife edge of rock that requires both nerve and skill to traverse. To the south, the Three Sisters of Glencoe rise in dramatic succession, massive buttresses of rock separated by deep corries. These are not actually separate mountains, but rather three spurs extending from Bedian Nam Bian, the highest peak in Argyll, at 1150 meters. The River Cove flows down the center of the glen, gathering the waters of countless small burns that tumble from the surrounding heights. In autumn, after rain, these waterfalls are at their most spectacular. White water racing down dark rock, the sound of them audible even over the wind. The river itself runs clear over a bed of smooth stones, creating pools where salmon rest on their journey upstream to spawn. Walking in Glencoe in October means encountering weather that can change in minutes. I've experienced sunshine so bright it made the colors almost overwhelming, followed within an hour by mist so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I've watched storm clouds gather over the Three Sisters, darkening the sky and turning the light a strange yellow-green, only to have them blow away minutes later, leaving blue sky and brilliant clarity in their wake. This changeability is part of the Glen's character. It keeps you alert, present, aware that you're in a place where nature remains very much in charge. The history that lingers in Glencoe is dark. In February of 1692, 38 members of the MacDonald clan were massacred here by government troops, many of them from Clan Campbell, who had been billeted with the MacDonalds under the Highland tradition of hospitality. The massacre was political, ordered from Edinburgh and London, punishment for the MacDonalds' delay in swearing allegiance to King William. But the betrayal of Highland hospitality, the murder of hosts by their guests, added a layer of horror that has never quite faded from this place. You don't need to know this history to feel that something heavy hangs over Glencoe. The landscape itself seems to carry it. But knowing it, walking these paths where it happened, looking up at mountains that witnessed that February night, adds another dimension to the experience. The Glen has been called the Valley of Weeping, and while that name may be romanticized, there's something about the place, especially under grey skies with mist in the air, that does seem melancholy, brooding, haunted by memory. But Glencoe isn't only about darkness. In autumn especially, it's about transformation, about beauty emerging from violence. The volcanic eruptions that created this landscape were cataclysmic. The glaciers that carved it were inexorable. The human tragedy that occurred here was heartbreaking. But what remains is a place of extraordinary beauty. The heather that covers the lower slopes blooms purple in late summer and fades to russet in autumn. The rowans that cling to the rocky slopes offer bright red berries that the birds feast on through the fall. The birches, growing wherever they can find purchase, turn their leaves to gold, creating splashes of color against the dark rock. There's a walk from the visitor center at the entrance to the Glen that leads to the so-called Lost Valley, Quire Gab Hill in Gaelic. This hidden quarry, tucked between two of the Three Sisters, was used by the MacDonalds to hide stolen cattle from rival clans, and later from English troops. The path to reach it crosses the River Co on stepping stones, then climbs steeply through a boulder field before emerging into a high, flat valley, completely hidden from below. In autumn, this walk is particularly beautiful. The lower section through birch woodland glows gold in the slanted light. Higher up, the open mountainside shows every shade of brown and amber. And if you're there at the right time, in the right light, the Lost Valley itself seems almost magical. A secret place where the everyday world feels very far away. The weather in Glencoe can turn severe without much warning, especially as autumn progresses. By late October, snow can cap the higher peaks, creating a striking contrast with the autumn colors below. The wind, funneled by the mountains, can reach gale force, making walking difficult and exposure a real risk. But on the gentler days, of which there are many, walking in Glencoe in autumn is an experience that engages all the senses. The smell of damp earth and heather, the sound of water rushing over stones, the feel of the wind carrying moisture from the Atlantic, the taste of that wind, slightly salt when it comes from the west, and everywhere the visual feast of color and form, of light and shadow, of near and far. Glencoe is not a large place. The glen proper is only about 8 miles long, but it's a place that rewards slow exploration, that reveals itself in layers. You can drive through in 20 minutes and think you've seen it, or you can spend days here and discover new facets every day. In autumn, with the light changing constantly, with the colors at their peak, with the weather providing an ever-shifting backdrop, it's a place that never quite looks the same twice. And that, perhaps, is part of its enduring appeal. It's a landscape that lives, that breathes, that responds to season and weather with a vitality that makes every visit unique. From Glencoe, the road continues west to the coast, but our journey turns back northeast, following a different route along the Great Glen toward Loch Ness. This famous body of water, second largest loch in Scotland by surface area, but first by volume because of its extraordinary depth, has captured imaginations for centuries, though not always for the reasons you might expect. Yes, there's the legend of the monster Nessie, supposedly a surviving plesiosaur or some other unknown creature lurking in the loch's dark depths. This legend, though it has ancient roots, really took off in the 1930s and has been good for tourism ever since. But while the monster is what draws many visitors, It's the landscape around the loch that holds you there. In autumn especially, Loch Ness reveals a quieter, subtler beauty than its summer face. The loch runs almost perfectly straight, following the line of the Great Glen Fault. It's about 23 miles long, but only about a mile wide for most of its length. The hills rise steeply on both sides, clothed in a mixture of forestry plantation and semi-natural woodland. In autumn, these hillsides display a rich palette. The commercial forestry, mostly Sitka spruce, remains dark green, but mixed through it are stands of birch and rowan that turn gold and orange, creating a patchwork effect. Along the shoreline, where ancient deciduous woodland has survived, the colors are even more varied, with oak and hazel adding their own hues to the seasonal display. The water of Loch Ness is dark, stained brown by peat from the surrounding hills. This darkness, combined with the loch's great depth and the amount of suspended particles in the water, means visibility is very limited. Even in the clearest conditions, you can see down only about 10 or 12 feet. This murky quality contributes to the loch's mysterious atmosphere. It's not hard to imagine something large living in these depths unseen. Along the northwestern shore of the loch, about halfway down its length, stand the ruins of Urquhart Castle. This location, on a rocky promontory jutting into the loch, is spectacularly scenic. The castle, though now mostly ruinous, was once one of Scotland's largest, controlling the Great Glen and commanding views up and down the loch. Its history is turbulent, passing between Scottish and English control during the Wars of Independence, enduring raids by the Lords of the Isles, and finally being partially destroyed by government troops after the Jacobite Rising of 1689 to prevent its use by rebel forces. In autumn, Urquhart Castle takes on a particular beauty. The stone of the ruins, dark grey and weathered, contrasts with the autumn colours of the trees that have grown up around it. Ivy and other climbing plants, turning red and gold, soften some of the walls. From the Grant Tower, the best preserved part of the castle, you can look out over Loch Ness and see exactly why this position was so strategically important. The views are magnificent in any season, but in October, with the hillsides showing their autumn colors and the light taking on that particular slant, they're exceptional. The approach to the castle, up from the visitor center, passes through woodland that glows gold in autumn. Birch trees, their white bark striking against the dark trunks of pines, create a dappled pattern of light and shade. Rowan trees, called the mountain ash, though they're not related to ash at all, offer brilliant red berries that stand out against the changing leaves. These berries are an important food source for birds preparing for winter, and you'll often see field fairs and redwings, winter visitors from Scandinavia, feasting on them. Walking the loch shore is an experience in contrasts. The water is usually calm, especially in the morning before any wind picks up. It reflects the sky and surrounding hills with extraordinary clarity, creating a mirror image that can be disorienting until you distinguish water from reflection. But this calm can be deceptive. The loch is so deep and so large that it creates its own weather patterns. Wind can come up suddenly, whipping the surface into white caps. Mist can roll in from the mountains, reducing visibility to a few dozen meters. And the temperature of the water, which averages around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius even in summer, remains cold enough throughout the year to be dangerous for anyone who falls in. But on the gentle autumn days, when the air is crisp and the sun breaks through the clouds, walking the shore of Loch Ness is a meditative experience. The water laps quietly against the stones. The occasional fish breaks the surface with a soft splash. Birds call from the woodland behind. The mountains across the loch appear as layered ridges in varying shades of blue and grey, growing fainter with distance. And over everything, that particular quality of Highland autumn light, clear and golden, making the ordinary seem luminous. The woodland along Loch Ness, particularly near Urquhart Bay, contains some beautiful examples of alluvial woodland, forest that has established on the fertile soil deposited by streams flowing into the loch. These woods, unlike the commercial forestry that covers so many Highland hillsides, have a more natural character. The trees are varied in age and species. The understory is rich with ferns and mosses. In autumn, the forest floor is carpeted with fallen leaves, creating a soft, rustling path. The air smells of damp earth and decay, that rich autumn smell of things returning to the soil. This is also a good place for wildlife watching. Red squirrels, now rare in much of Britain, but still common in Scottish woodlands, where the introduced grey squirrels haven't taken hold, are active in autumn, gathering and hiding food for winter. Pine martens, cat-sized members of the weasel family, also live in these woods, though they're largely nocturnal and seldom seen during the day. But if you're walking quietly at dawn or dusk, you might catch a glimpse of one. Roe deer, smaller and more delicate than their red deer cousins, browse in the woodland. And if you're lucky enough to spot one of these shy creatures, its graceful movement through the autumn landscape is a beautiful sight. The Great Glen itself, this massive valley that holds Loch Ness along with several other lochs, is a landscape feature of continental scale, visible from space. Walking its length, whether along the road, the old drove roads, or the newer Great Glen Way hiking path, you're following one of Europe's most significant geological features. And in autumn, when the deciduous trees that line its length wear their finest colors and the heather on the hills has faded to its winter russet, it's a journey that combines the dramatic scale of Highland landscape with the intimate beauty of seasonal change. October in the Scottish Highlands is not just the month of autumn colours and changing light. It's also the month of the red deer rut, one of nature's most dramatic seasonal spectacles. The red deer, Britain's largest land mammal, lives year-round in the Highlands, but it's in autumn that these animals become most visible, most active, most compelling to watch. The modern Gaelic name for October is an damhair, derived either from words meaning stag copulation or stag clamour, both referring to this annual event. The rut typically runs from late September through October into early November, peaking in mid-October when the activity is at its most intense. During this period, mature stags, which have spent most of the year living separately from the hinds and younger deer, compete fiercely for the right to mate with groups of females. The first sign of the rut is often auditory rather than visual. The roaring of a red deer stag is an extraordinary sound, deep and resonant, carrying across glens and over hills for remarkable distances. It's a sound that seems to embody the wild character of the Highlands, a sound that humans have heard in these mountains for thousands of years. The Gaelic speakers who lived here long before the clearances knew this sound well, weaving it into their understanding of the seasons, recognizing October not just by the angle of the sun or the colors of the leaves, but by the roaring of the stags echoing through the glens. A mature red deer stag is an impressive animal. They can weigh up to 220 kilograms and stand over 1 meter tall at the shoulder. Their antlers, grown fresh each year and shed each spring, can span over 1 meter and carry more than 12 points. In autumn, these antlers are at their prime, fully grown and cleaned of the velvet that covered them during growth. The stags themselves, having spent the summer months building up body weight are in peak physical condition. During the rut, a successful stag will gather a harem of hinds, sometimes as many as 20 or more, and defend them against rival males. This defense involves a complex series of behaviors. The stag roars frequently, advertising his presence and his strength. He herds the hinds, moving constantly around the group to keep them together and to keep other males away. And he engages in displays and, if necessary, fights with challenging males. The fights between stags are spectacular and can be dangerous. Two males of roughly equal size and strength will lock antlers and push against each other, each trying to gain ground, each attempting to demonstrate superior power. The sound of antlers clashing together, of hooves churning the earth, of the labored breathing of animals giving their all, is visceral and primal. Most fights last only a few minutes before one stag concedes and retreats, but occasionally, particularly when both animals are evenly matched, the contest can be prolonged and intense. It's sometimes possible, in sheltered positions, to watch the rut at relatively close range. The stags are so focused on their competition that they become less wary of human presence, though it's crucial never to approach too closely. These are wild animals, powerful and potentially dangerous, especially during this testosterone-charged period. But from a respectful distance, with binoculars or a telephoto lens, watching the drama of the rut unfold is an unforgettable experience. The landscape where this occurs adds immensely to the spectacle. Imagine a glen in the Highlands on an October morning. The low sun breaks through gaps in the clouds, creating shafts of golden light that illuminate patches of hillside while leaving others in shadow. The grass and heather show every shade of gold and russet. A light mist hangs in the valley bottom, beginning to burn off as the day warms. And there, silhouetted against this backdrop, are the deer. Hinds grazing quietly, a stag standing alert on the higher ground, his antlers like a crown against the sky. Another stag approaching, roaring his challenge. The scene plays out like something from the dawn of time, unchanged in its essentials for millennia. The Glen Affric area, often called Scotland's most beautiful glen, is particularly renowned for red deer watching during the rut. This remote valley, with its mixture of ancient Caledonian pine forest and open mountainside, provides ideal habitat for deer. The combination of woodland for shelter and open ground for the displays of the rut creates perfect conditions for both the animals and for those hoping to observe them. The sound of the rutting stags is perhaps most impressive in this kind of setting, where the glen walls create natural amplification. A stag roaring from one side of the valley will be answered by another from the opposite side, the sounds echoing back and forth, creating an almost symphonic effect. In the evening, as the light fades and the temperature drops, this roaring intensifies. It's a sound that connects you to the ancient wildness of this place, a reminder that despite roads and visitor centres and modern amenities, the Highlands remain a landscape where natural processes continue, much as they have for thousands of years. Red deer have lived in Scotland for at least 10,000 years since the end of the last ice age. They evolved as animals of the woodland edge, browsers that move between forest and open ground. Over time, as the Caledonian forest was reduced through human activity, they adapted to life on more open moorland and hillsides. Now, seeing them against a backdrop of mountains and heather, it's easy to forget that they were originally woodland creatures. But in places like Glen Affric, where patches of the old forest remain, you can still see them in their original habitat, moving through the pines as their ancestors did. The hinds give birth in late spring and early summer, and by autumn, their calves are about 4 or 5 months old. These young deer, still spotted in their summer coats, are weaned by October but remain close to their mothers. During the rut, the hinds and calves form the harems that the stags compete for, but the females themselves appear remarkably calm amid all the male drama. They continue to graze, to rest, to nurse their young, seemingly unconcerned by the roaring and fighting happening around them. After the rut ends, usually by early November, the stags, exhausted from weeks of constant activity and little feeding, must quickly rebuild their strength before winter sets in. This is a critical period for them. The Highland winter is harsh, and deer that enter it in poor condition may not survive. The hinds, meanwhile, pregnant from the rut, must also put on weight to sustain themselves and their developing fawns through the winter months. For the visitor to the Highlands in autumn, encountering the deer rut adds an extra dimension to the experience. It's one thing to admire the beauty of the landscape, the colors of the season, the play of light and shadow. It's quite another to witness a natural drama that has been occurring in these mountains since long before humans arrived here, to hear sounds that echo through time, to see behaviors refined over millions of years of evolution. The rut makes the autumn highlands not just a place to look at, but a place to experience in a more complete way, engaging not just the eyes, but the ears, not just the aesthetic sense, but the awareness of being present in a landscape where wild processes continue, where nature still operates on its own terms. The autumn colours in the Scottish Highlands are different from the fiery displays you might see in New England or Japan. They're subtler, more varied, more intimately tied to the specific character of Highland vegetation and landscape. Understanding these colours means understanding the plants that create them and the ecological context in which they grow. The birch tree is perhaps the quintessential Scottish autumn tree. Silver birch and downy birch both grow throughout the Highlands, often pioneering on bare ground, colonizing areas where other trees struggle. Their leaves turn a pure, clear yellow in autumn, a color that seems to glow from within when backlit by the sun. Birch woodland in October is a magical place. The white bark of the trunks and the golden canopy create a combination of light and color that feels almost otherworldly. Walking through such woodland with the leaves rustling overhead and crunching underfoot, with shafts of sunlight penetrating the canopy to illuminate patches of forest floor, is an experience that engages all the senses. Rowan trees, also called mountain ash, grow scattered across the Highlands, often in rocky places where few other trees can establish. By October, their pinnate leaves have turned yellow and orange, and they carry heavy clusters of bright red berries. These berries are beloved by birds, particularly thrushes, and a rowan tree in fruit becomes a focal point of activity. In Highland tradition, rowan was considered a protective tree, often planted near houses to ward off witches and evil spirits. While that belief has faded, the tree itself remains a vital part of the Highland ecosystem and a beautiful element of the autumn landscape. Aspen, a tree related to poplars, grows in scattered groves in the Highlands. Its leaves, attached to the branch by flattened stems, tremble in even the slightest breeze, creating a distinctive rustling sound that has made the tree legendary in many cultures. In autumn, aspen leaves turn a bright butter yellow, creating patches of intense color against the darker greens of the conifers. Aspen groves often grow on hillsides with good drainage, and finding one on an autumn day with the leaves quivering and glowing in the sunlight feels like discovering a secret garden. The Scots pine, the only pine native to Britain, doesn't change colour in autumn as it's an evergreen, but its dark green provides the perfect backdrop against which the deciduous trees display their colors. The Caledonian pine forest, that remnant of the ancient woodland that once covered much of the Highlands, consists primarily of Scots pine. These trees are beautiful in their own right, with reddish bark on the upper trunk and branches, and a distinctive shape that becomes more gnarled and picturesque with age. In autumn, walking through a Caledonian pine forest is to move through a space of contrasts: the dark green of the pines, the golden yellow of the birches that grow among them, the bright red of rowan berries, all set against the brown of pine needles carpeting the forest floor. But the autumn colors in the Highlands aren't only found in the woodlands. The moorlands, which cover vast areas, have their own seasonal palette. Heather, which blooms purple and pink in late summer, fades in autumn to shades of russet and brown. But this fading isn't uniform. Different patches of heather on a hillside will be at different stages, creating a patchwork of colors ranging from purple-brown to almost rust red. Mixed with the heather are grasses that turn golden in autumn, and bracken, which transforms from green to a spectacular copper orange before dying back entirely. The bracken, actually a fern rather than a grass, covers huge areas of the Highlands. In summer, it's green, forming dense stands that can grow taller than a person. But with the first frosts of autumn, it begins to change. The green fades first to yellow, then to orange, then to a deep copper brown. At its peak, usually in mid to late October, bracken-covered hillsides glow with an intensity that rivals any autumn tree. The color is warm and rich, and when the sun strikes a bracken-covered slope at the right angle, it can look almost luminous. Sphagnum moss, which grows in the wetter areas and peat bogs of the Highlands, also changes color in autumn. In summer, it's various shades of green, but as temperatures drop and growth slows, some species turn red or orange, creating brilliant patches of color in boggy areas. Combined with the yellowing of bog cotton and the browning of other bog plants, these areas take on a surprisingly beautiful character, challenging the notion that bogs are dull or featureless landscapes. The interplay of all these colors creates the characteristic look of the Highland autumn landscape. It's not a uniform blanket of one or two colors, like the reds and oranges of a New England autumn. Instead, it's a complex mosaic. Patches of golden birch woodland, dark green pine forest, orange-brown bracken slopes, purple russet heather moorland, and above it all, the grey and brown of the mountain peaks. The overall effect is rich and subtle, requiring a slower, more attentive way of seeing to fully appreciate. The light plays a crucial role in bringing out these colors. The low angle of the October sun creates long shadows and warm golden light that enhances the warm tones of the autumn landscape. Early morning and late afternoon, the so-called golden hours for photographers, are particularly beautiful. The light at these times seems to make the colors glow from within. A hillside that looks pleasant in the flat light of midday can become transcendent in the slanted light of evening. Every shade of gold and copper intensified, every texture emphasized. Weather conditions also affect how the colors appear. On overcast days, the colors can seem muted, the landscape taking on a more somber character. But this has its own beauty, a quieter, more contemplative feel. And when the sun breaks through after rain, when the colors are intensified by moisture and the light is particularly clear, the landscape can seem almost surreal in its vividness. The progression of color through the autumn weeks follows a general pattern, but varies significantly depending on elevation, exposure, and local conditions. The highest elevations, where only hardy plants can survive, show little change. The mid-elevations, where heather moorland dominates, shift gradually through shades of purple to brown. The lower slopes and valley bottoms, where trees can grow, show the most dramatic transformations, with the deciduous species putting on their annual display before dropping their leaves and entering dormancy. By late October, the peak of color is usually passing. The birches are dropping their leaves. The bracken is becoming brown and brittle. The rowans have been stripped of their berries by hungry birds. But this late-season landscape has its own stark beauty, a sense of the year winding down, of nature preparing for winter. And there's a poignancy to it, a reminder that beauty is always temporary, always changing, that to appreciate it fully, we must catch it in its fleeting moment. The Cairngorms National Park, Britain's largest national park, encompasses an enormous area of the Central and Eastern Highlands. This is a landscape of superlatives. It contains 5 of the 6 highest mountains in the United Kingdom. It has the largest area of Arctic alpine habitat in Britain. It's home to rare wildlife, including the Scottish wildcat, the pine marten, and the capercaillie, a turkey-sized grouse that lives only in old pine forest. In autumn, the Cairngorms region displays all the characteristics of Highland autumn, but on a grand scale. The mountains themselves, many of them over 1,000 meters high, form a vast plateau of tundra-like vegetation. By October, this high ground is often dusted with snow, creating a striking contrast between the white-capped peaks and the warm autumn colors of the lower elevations. The approach to the Cairngorms from the north, from Inverness or Aviemore, takes you through Strathspey, a broad valley where the River Spey meanders through a landscape of moorland and forest. This is whisky country, home to many of Scotland's most famous distilleries, and in autumn the smell of malt sometimes drifts from these buildings, adding another sensory dimension to the experience of the landscape. The forests around Aviemore and extending up into the Cairngorms proper contain some of the best remaining examples of Caledonian pine forest. These ancient woodlands, fragments of a forest that once covered most of the Highlands, have a particular character. The Scots pines here are old, many of them over 200 years, some approaching 300. They're gnarled and picturesque, with trunks that twist and branches that spread in distinctive shapes. The forest floor is carpeted with pine needles, creating a soft brown surface that dampens sound. Moss and lichen grow on the tree trunks and fallen logs in every shade of green imaginable. But these Caledonian forests aren't pure pine forests. Growing among the pines are birches, rowans, aspens, and junipers. In autumn, this mixture creates a wonderful contrast. The dark green of the pines provides a constant backdrop, while the deciduous trees offer splashes of gold and orange. The overall effect is reminiscent of a traditional Scottish tartan, with its pattern of colours woven together in a complex design. Walking through this kind of forest in October is to enter a world apart. The trees filter the light, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. The air is cool and carries the scent of pine resin and damp earth. The forest is quiet in a way that urban environments never are. A quietness that's not absence of sound, but rather a different quality of sound, composed of wind in the treetops, the occasional call of a bird, the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. This is habitat for some of Scotland's most interesting wildlife. The red squirrel, in its Highland strongholds, is particularly active in autumn, gathering and burying pine cones and hazelnuts to sustain it through the winter. The capercaillie, though rare and notoriously shy, lives in these forests, the males with their distinctive beards and the females with their beautifully barred plumage. Pine martens, cat-sized predators with chocolate brown fur and a distinctive cream bib, hunt here for voles and birds, though they're rarely seen during the day. Higher up, beyond the tree line, the landscape changes to open moorland and eventually to the Arctic alpine zone of the high Cairngorm Plateau. This is a landscape of dwarf shrubs, lichens, and mosses, able to survive the harsh conditions of high elevation and extreme exposure. In summer, these plants bloom, creating carpets of small flowers. But by October, that flowering season has long passed, and the vegetation has taken on its winter aspect, browns and greys that blend with the surrounding rock. The plateau itself, accessible by a funicular railway or by hiking up one of several paths, is an otherworldly environment. It's essentially Arctic tundra, similar to what you'd find in northern Scandinavia or Arctic Canada. The growing season here is very short, the wind almost constant, the temperature rarely comfortable. But there's a stark beauty to it, a sense of being in an extreme environment where only the hardiest organisms can survive. In October, with snow beginning to accumulate, it's a place that gives you a sense of what the Highlands might have been like during the Ice Age, when glaciers covered most of this landscape. The weather in the Cairngorms can be severe. This high ground generates its own weather patterns, and conditions can deteriorate rapidly. Wind speeds can be extreme, especially in winter, but even in autumn. Temperatures on the summit plateau can be 20 degrees colder than in the valleys below. Snow can fall even in September, and by October, it's not uncommon to have significant accumulations on the high ground, even while the valley bottoms remain green and mild. But on the good days, when the weather is settled and clear, the views from the Cairngorms are extraordinary. You can see across vast distances, ridge after ridge of mountains extending to the horizon. To the west, the jagged peaks of the Northwest Highlands. To the north, the hills of Sutherland. To the east, the land slopes gradually towards the coast and the North Sea. And everywhere, the characteristic highland landscape of mountain, moorland, forest, and water. The rivers and streams that drain the Cairngorms are particularly beautiful in autumn. Fed by rainfall and the last of the summer's snowmelt, they run fast and clear over beds of smooth granite stones. Waterfalls are common, some of them significant cascades where the water drops over rock steps. The sound of these streams and falls is a constant presence in the Cairngorm landscape, a reminder of the abundant rainfall and the power of water to shape this terrain. Loch Morlich, on the western edge of the Cairngorms, is a beautiful example of a mountain loch, surrounded by pine forest and with views to the high peaks beyond. It's a popular spot for water sports in summer, but in autumn, When the visitor numbers drop, it regains a sense of tranquility. The water, usually very calm, reflects the surrounding mountains and forest with mirror-like clarity. Birch trees along the shore turn golden, and on still autumn mornings, their reflection in the loch creates a perfect symmetry. The valleys that cut into the Cairngorm Massif, such as Glenavon and Glenfeshie, offer more sheltered environments than the exposed plateau. Here, you find a greater diversity of vegetation, more trees, more wildlife. These glens also show the autumn colours more intensely than the high ground. Walking up Glenfeshie on an October day, for instance, you pass through multiple vegetation zones. The lower part of the glen has birch woodland glowing gold. Higher up, the birches give way to more scattered trees and open moorland. Higher still, you enter the zone of dwarf shrubs and eventually the bare rock and gravel of the high mountains. Throughout the Cairngorms region, the autumn season brings a sense of preparation, both in nature and in human communities. Wildlife is preparing for winter, gathering food, putting on weight, moving to more sheltered locations. The few people who live year-round in these mountains are also preparing, stocking up on supplies, checking heating systems, making sure they're ready for the long highland winter that will inevitably come. But in early and mid-October, winter still feels distant. The days, though shortening, still provide ample light for exploring. The temperatures, though cool, are generally comfortable for walking and outdoor activity, and the colors at their peak provide a visual feast that makes the Cairngorms in autumn a destination worthy of travelling far to experience. The story of the Scottish Highlands cannot be separated from the story of the clans, those extended family groups that were the primary social and political units of Highland society for centuries. To walk through the autumn highlands is to walk through a landscape shaped not just by geology and ecology, but by history, by the actions and fates of the people who have lived here. The clan system, which reached its peak in the 16th and 17th centuries, was based on kinship, real or perceived. A clan was theoretically composed of people descended from a common ancestor, though in practice, many clan members had different surnames and may not have been blood relations at all. What bound them together was loyalty to the clan chief, who was both their leader and, in theory, their protector. The clans controlled territories, areas of the Highlands where their authority was recognized. The MacDonald clan, for instance, controlled much of the Western Highlands and Islands. The Campbells held lands in Argyll. The Mackenzies dominated the northwest. The Frasers and Macintoshes held territory in the Central Highlands. These territories often overlapped, and disputes between clans were common, sometimes erupting into violence. The clan chiefs held considerable power. They administered justice, collected rents, called up men for warfare. They lived in a kind of semi-feudal relationship with their clansmen, who worked the land and provided military service in return for the chief's protection and the right to live on clan territory. This system, while often romanticized, was harsh and hierarchical. The common clansmen lived lives of considerable hardship, working poor land in difficult conditions, vulnerable to the clan conflicts and the raids of rival clans. The Jacobite risings of the late 17th and early 18th centuries brought this clan system to its end. The Jacobites supported the claim of the exiled Stuart dynasty to the British throne, opposing the Hanoverian kings who had taken power after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Some Highland clans supported the Jacobite cause enthusiastically. Others remained neutral or sided with the government. The risings culminated in the rebellion of 1745, led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, which ended in disaster at the Battle of Culloden in April 1746. Culloden, fought on a moor east of Inverness, was the last major battle on British soil. It was brief and brutal. The Jacobite army, composed largely of Highland clansmen, was decisively defeated by government forces. Around 1,000 Jacobites died in the battle itself, and many more were hunted down and killed in the days and weeks that followed. The government's response to the rebellion was swift and savage. Highland culture was targeted for destruction. The wearing of clan tartans was banned. The carrying of weapons was forbidden. The speaking of Gaelic was discouraged. The power of the clan chiefs was broken. The aftermath of Culloden led to the Highland clearances, a process that transformed the Highlands over the next century. Landowners, many of them the former clan chiefs, now operating as commercial landlords, realized that sheep farming was more profitable than maintaining populations of tenant farmers. Thousands of people were evicted from their traditional lands. Their homes often burned to prevent their return. Some moved to coastal areas to become fishermen or workers in the kelp industry. Many emigrated to the Scottish Lowlands, to England, or overseas to North America, Australia, New Zealand. Walking through the Highlands in autumn, you see the legacy of the clearances everywhere. Ruined cottages, their walls still standing, but their roofs long gone, dot the landscape. Abandoned cultivation terraces show where potatoes and oats once grew. Place names echo with the memory of vanished communities. The landscape that seems so wild and empty now was once more populated, filled with the lives and work of people who are now gone, scattered across the world, or buried in forgotten graves. But the Highland heritage survives in other ways. Gaelic, though spoken now by only a small percentage of Scots, is experiencing something of a revival, taught in some schools, heard in signage and on BBC radio. Nan Guide Heel. Highland Games, held throughout the summer in communities across the region, maintain traditions of strength, competitions and dancing that go back centuries. The tartans that were once banned are now symbols of Scottish identity, worn proudly at weddings and formal occasions. The romantic movement of the 19th century, particularly the novels of Sir Walter Scott and the enthusiasm of Queen Victoria for all things Scottish, created a new image of the Highlands. What had been seen as a wild, dangerous, rebellious region became romanticized as a land of noble savages, of brave warriors, of romantic landscapes. This image, though often at odds with historical reality, helped preserve Highland culture, even as the economic and social basis for that culture was being destroyed. Today, walking through Glencoe or along the shores of Loch Ness, through the forests of the Cairngorms, or across the moorlands of the Northwest Highlands, you're walking through a landscape that carries all this history. The mountains witnessed the clan raids and the battles. The glens echo with the memory of the people who were driven from their homes. The place names, many of them Gaelic, speak of a time when this was a Gaelic-speaking land, when culture and language were intimately tied to these specific places. In autumn, this historical dimension adds depth to the experience of the landscape. The colors and the light, the deer rutting in the glens, the birds migrating overhead, these are all part of the eternal cycle of the seasons. But layered over this natural cycle is the human history, the stories of chieftains and clansmen, of battles and clearances, of a culture that was nearly destroyed but that survives, transformed into the present day. Experiencing the Scottish Highlands in autumn isn't just about what you see. It's about the full sensory immersion, the way the place engages all your senses simultaneously, creating a complete experience that lodges in memory with particular vividness. The air in the Highlands in October has a distinctive quality. It's cool, certainly, with temperatures typically ranging from around 5 degrees Celsius in the morning to perhaps 12 or 13 degrees by afternoon. But it's the crispness of the air that's most noticeable, a clarity that makes distant objects seem closer, that makes you feel like you're breathing something purer than the air of cities or even of lowland farmland. This air carries scents, the wet earth smell after rain, the resinous scent of pine needles, the peaty smell of bog water, the occasional whiff of wood smoke from a cottage chimney. The wind is an almost constant presence. The Highlands are exposed to Atlantic weather systems, and wind funnels through the glens, accelerates over ridges, swirls in complex patterns around the mountains. This wind is rarely gentle. Even on calm days, there's usually at least a breeze, enough to make the leaves flutter, to ripple the surface of lochs, to carry sounds from surprising distances. On windier days, it becomes a major feature of the landscape, something you have to lean into while walking, something that brings tears to your eyes and color to your cheeks. The sound of water is everywhere. This is one of the wettest regions in Europe, receiving annual rainfall that can exceed 4 meters in some western areas. All this rain has to go somewhere, and it does so through countless streams and rivers, through waterfalls and cascades, through the lochs that punctuate the landscape. The sound of running water becomes a kind of background music, sometimes gentle, sometimes powerful, but almost always present. After heavy rain, the waterfalls in the glens become particularly impressive, turning from thin ribbons to roaring torrents, their sound audible from miles away. The texture of the highland landscape is as varied as its visual appearance. The rocks that form the mountains can be rough and angular or smoothed by glaciers. The heather on the moorlands feels springy underfoot, each stem slightly woody, the whole creating a surface that's firm but gives slightly with each step. The moss that grows on rocks and trees is soft and damp to the touch. The pine needles that carpet the forest floor are dry and slippery. The bog cotton that grows in wet areas has seed heads that are soft as silk. The taste of the highlands in autumn comes partly from the food and drink that are traditional to the season. Venison, the meat of red deer, is at its best after the rut, when the animals have been active and feeding well. It's a lean, flavorful meat, often prepared simply to let its natural taste come through. Game birds like grouse and partridge are also in season, their meat darker and more intense than domestic poultry. Whiskey, of course, is Scotland's most famous drink, and the Highland region produces some of the finest. The character of Highland whiskey varies depending on where it's made, but is generally described as fruity, sweet, and malty, sometimes with a hint of peat smoke. Tasting whiskey in its home landscape, perhaps after a day's walking in the hills, creates a particular connection between the drink and the place that made it. The berries that ripen in autumn also offer their own tastes. Rowan berries, though too bitter to eat raw, can be made into a jelly that has a sharp, astringent flavour. Brambles, the Scottish name for blackberries, grow abundantly in many areas and can be picked throughout September and into October. Bilberries, called bleaberries in Scotland, are smaller and more intensely flavoured than commercial blueberries. But perhaps the most distinctive taste is simply the taste of the air and the water. The burns that run down from the mountains carry water that has filtered through peat and rock, and drinking from them directly, though always consider the possibility of upstream contamination from sheep or deer, gives you the pure taste of the Highlands. It's cold and slightly peaty, with a mineral quality that reflects the geology of the land it has passed through. The play of light in the Highland autumn creates moods and atmospheres that change hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute. The sun, when it appears, is at a low angle even at midday, creating long shadows and golden light. This light seems to make everything it touches more beautiful, intensifying colors, emphasizing textures, creating contrasts between illuminated areas and those in shadow. But the sun is often hidden by clouds, and the resulting light is different, but no less interesting. Overcast skies create soft, even illumination that reveals subtle variations in color that might be lost in bright sunlight. The grays and blues of a cloudy sky can be beautiful in their own right, especially when broken by gaps through which light streams in dramatic rays. Mist and fog are common in the Highlands, particularly in autumn, when warm, moist air from the Atlantic encounters the cooling land. Low-lying mist in the valleys creates ethereal scenes, with the tops of mountains rising above a sea of white, or trees appearing and disappearing as the mist shifts. Higher up, mist can envelop you completely, reducing visibility to a few meters and giving even familiar landscapes a strange, otherworldly quality. Rain, so much a part of the Highland climate, changes the character of everything it touches. Colors become more saturated, rocks gleam. The forest becomes darker, more mysterious, The waterfalls swell and roar. Walking in light rain, properly equipped with waterproof clothing, can actually be a pleasant experience. The drops pattering on your jacket, the world taking on a soft focus, the usual long views replaced by more intimate scenes of what's immediately around you. The experience of the Highland autumn engages the body as well as the senses. Walking the hills and glens is physical work, requiring effort, building heat even in the cool air. The tiredness that comes from a long day's walking is a satisfying kind of fatigue. The body well used, the mind cleared of daily concerns. And at the end of such a day, there's the pleasure of warmth and shelter, of a hot meal, of dry clothes, of rest well earned. As we come to the end of our journey through the Scottish Highlands in autumn, I find myself changed by the experience. This landscape, which I approached with such anticipation, has exceeded even my elevated expectations. It's not just the beauty, though that has been extraordinary. It's the sense of depth, the layers of meaning that reveal themselves the more time you spend here. The geological time, visible in the rocks and the shape of the land. The ecological time, the cycles of seasons and life that have repeated here for thousands of years. The human time, the history written in place, names and ruins and stories. All these layers exist simultaneously, and walking through this landscape in autumn, you become aware of them all. The autumn season itself becomes a metaphor for transition, for change. The year is moving from the abundance of summer toward the austerity of winter. The colors that seem so vivid now will soon fade. The leaves will fall. The snow will come. But before that happens, there's this moment, this brief window when everything is at its most beautiful, when the light is at its most golden, when the landscape seems to glow with an inner radiance. As a visitor, encountering this place for the first time, I'm acutely aware of my own status as an outsider. This isn't my home. These aren't my mountains. I don't have the deep knowledge that comes from living here year-round, from seeing the landscape in all its moods and seasons. But perhaps there's something to be said for the fresh eyes of the visitor, for the ability to see with wonder things that might become too familiar to those who see them every day. The Scottish Highlands in autumn offers something that's increasingly rare in our modern world: a sense of wildness, of nature operating on its own terms. Yes, this is a managed landscape. The forests are often plantations. The deer populations are controlled. The paths are maintained. But despite all this human influence, the essential character of the place remains wild. The weather does what it wants. The deer rut according to their ancient instincts. The autumn colors come and go on their own schedule. In a world that often feels increasingly controlled, increasingly domesticated, the Highlands remind us that there are still places where nature has the upper hand, where human plans and schedules must accommodate themselves to the realities of rock and weather and distance. This wildness is valuable beyond measure. It's a kind of wealth that can't be counted in economic terms, but that enriches those who experience it in ways that last long after the visit ends. If you've been with me on this journey through these words, perhaps you've begun to see the Highland autumn in your mind's eye, to imagine the golden birches and the roaring stags, the dark waters of Loch Ness, and the volcanic drama of Glencoe. Perhaps you've even begun to plan your own visit to experience these things, not through description but directly, with all your senses engaged. If you do visit, remember to dress for changeable weather, to respect the landscape and its wildlife, to walk carefully and leave no trace. Remember that the Highlands, for all their beauty, can be dangerous for the unprepared. But also remember to slow down, to take time to really see what's around you, to sit quietly and let the place work its magic. The autumn Highlands have a way of settling into your soul, of becoming a place you carry with you even after you've left. The images, the sounds, the smells, they lodge in memory with particular vividness, and often in the midst of ordinary life in other places, you'll find yourself thinking back to a particular moment. Sunlight through golden birch leaves, the roar of a stag echoing through a glen, the dark waters of a loch reflecting the mountains, the feel of the wind and the smell of peat and pine. These memories become treasures, reminders of beauty, of wildness, of a landscape that has endured for millions of years and will endure long after we're gone. The Scottish Highlands in autumn teach patience, perspective, humility. They remind us that we are part of nature, not separate from it, and that our own cycles of life and death are part of the same great pattern that brings the seasons around year after year. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let your mind wander through these highland glens. Imagine yourself walking a forest path where golden birch leaves drift down around you. Feel the cool autumn air on your face. Hear the distant roar of a stag, the sound of water over stones, the wind in the pines. See the mountains rising all around, their peaks touching the clouds, their slopes clothed in heather and grass in every shade of autumn. Let this landscape become a place of peace for you, a refuge you can return to in your imagination whenever you need to find calm, to remember beauty, to reconnect with something larger and older than the concerns of daily life. The Highlands will be there, waiting, unchanged in their essential character, despite all the changes time brings. And perhaps, if you've enjoyed this journey with me tonight, you might consider subscribing to this channel, where we explore beautiful places around the world through this gentle, contemplative lens. A like on this video helps others find these peaceful stories too, but more importantly, I hope you found a moment of calm, a brief respite from whatever concerns might have been troubling you. The autumn highlands, with their golden light and ancient mountains, with their roaring stags and falling leaves, with their deep lochs and rushing streams, are a gift to all who take the time to experience them. May they bring you peace tonight, and may your dreams be filled with beauty. Sleep well, and until next time, safe travels.